Hey, it's Francis Lamb, host of The Splendid Table. Every week on our show, we talk about food and cooking and the meanings of food and cooking. We talk with the most interesting people in food about their techniques, their culture, and everything in between. Whether it's about how fried chicken took over the world or how Instagram changes the way people are actually eating. It's a food show where everyone is welcome. Come join us. You can listen to The Splendid Table wherever you get your podcasts.
Today's program is brought to you by Korin, a supplier of Japanese chef knives and restaurant supplies. For more information, visit korin.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, welcome to Japan Eats. I'm your host Aki Kotema, food writer and the director of the New York Japanese Culinary Academy, which promotes a deep understanding of Japanese cuisine in America. We are broadcasting live from Brooklyn, New York. This show is all about Japanese food and food culture. We see sushi at every day in the supermarket, but what is beyond sushi? We hear dashi ramen izakaya, but what exactly are they? Japanese food is still a mystery for many people, and I try to demystify it in this program with my cook guests. And my guest today is Dr. Arielle Johnson. Arielle is a flavor scientist who advises some of the top chefs, restaurants, and bars in the world. For example, she co-founded the fermentation lab at the restaurant Noma in Copenhagen, which has been named the best restaurant in the world multiple times by the world's 50 best restaurants. Arielle is currently the science director of Noma projects and co-founder of Retronasal Industries, among other important roles. And Arielle is also the author of Flavorama, a guide to unlocking the art and the science of flavor, which came out in March 2024. And the book is a wonderful tool for all of us to understand the science of flavors and to apply it to our daily lives in fun and practical ways. So today we'll discuss how Arielle got into the world of tastes and flavors, the joy and challenges of applying science to professional kitchens at the top restaurants in the world, how you can apply food science to your daily life, along with the tips from Arielle's new book, Flavorama, and much, much more. But before we start, Japan is available on Heritage Radio Network website, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify as a podcast. So please go to iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, whichever you listen to, and subscribe to Japan Eats. And please write a review. We truly appreciate your feedback. Now let's start a conversation with Dr. Arielle Johnson. Hello, Arielle. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
Right, so I read your book, and this is very exciting to be able to discuss it. It's really dense and precious information packed in one book. So first of all, to get to know you, where are you from, and what did you eat when you grew up?
I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and both of my parents had, moved there from other cities and kind of like developed an interest in food and cooking. More than they'd necessarily had at home. So they cooked a lot from like the Silver Palette cookbook. We ate a lot of like takeout of like Chinese and Japanese and Indian food. So yeah, definitely kind of a mix of different foods, but I think not that uncommon for like the 1990s.
Right. So you were born into the right environment, and that makes sense. What you're doing is for your job now, right? So how did you get into the world of taste and flavors like you do now professionally?
Yeah, well, so I've always loved food, loved tastes, flavors, and smells, loved cooking. When I was quite small, I had very interesting opinions about flavors and about smells. My sort of go-to ice cream store order was orange sherbet with Reese's peanut butter cups on it. I think I was trying to hit kind of as many different like sweet, sour, creamy, salty, savory, chocolatey flavors at once. I used to love the smell of like roasted coffee beans and even gasoline. So it was all sort of yeah. Intense flavors and smells. So it was all sort of there. I didn't really realize that was anything that you could study or that anyone, knew about for quite a while. But while I was in college, I started a bachelor's degree in chemistry, and as I was doing that, the sort of idea that there was, the science of the kitchen, and that was a thing, was like gaining a lot more attention. Harold McGee came out with the second edition of On Food and Cooking around that time. There was a lot of attention being paid to places like El Bulli in Spain, experimental restaurants, and so I kind of fell in with some people there at NYU, which is where I went to college, who were also interested in cuisine, but they came from like the chemistry department, from the food studies department. They'd invited some chefs from downtown as well to join, and as I went to seminars with them, did research, it became clear that something in this area of chemistry and gastronomy was something that I needed to be doing, because I loved it. It was definitely something I could see myself doing in the long term. So I was looking into how does one do this? And the two basic routes were either you become a chef and sort of teach yourself science, or you become a scientist and figure out how to apply that to cooking. So I wrote to a couple of different graduate programs. Most of them wrote back saying well, that's not a real thing, so no, you can't do that here. But UC Davis wrote back and said, well, we have a very open-ended agricultural and environmental chemistry graduate program where people really, define what their research projects are. So, if you can figure out a way to do that, we're not going to stop you, which was about as close to a yes as you often get. So while I was on my way there and really immersing myself in all the possibilities for what parts of food can you study with chemistry, I discovered flavor chemistry, sensory science, that these were things that people studied in depth, using all kinds of really interesting techniques. And as soon as I started doing some projects in those, I just completely fell in love with it.
Interesting. So, and you're a scientist, you could have been working for major food companies or something and have a very stable job, but, you have applied your academic knowledge in very practical fields in your life so far. And most notably, you co-founded the science lab at Noma in Denmark, and which has been named the world's best restaurant first in 2020 and 4 times more by the 50 world's best restaurant. So, now you're a science director at Noma Project, which is also part of Noma. So how did you get involved in Noma, which is very unique organizations beyond just the restaurant, right? So
it is. No, it's a really special place. When I didn't really have any need or any idea that I wanted to chase a lot of prestige or something like that. I mostly just look for things that I find the most interesting. And, so I was studying flavor chemistry but kept in mind that I had really gotten into that field, had bothered going to graduate school in the first place because I, loved collaborating with chefs and restaurants, and the sort of applications of everything that I was studying really tantalizing to me. So, at the time, it was probably about 2011. A lot of people doing sort of creative and technical and scientific things with food were gathering on places like Twitter or the e-gullet forums back when people were on forums. And so it was, just kind of a matter of hanging out in those spaces until you figured out who around you was doing the interesting stuff. And, I'd heard that Noma had started a food conference called the Mad Symposium, and that they'd even started a lab on a houseboat outside of their restaurant. And the lab was called the Nordic Food Lab, and they were dedicated to understanding and applying the sort of scientific side of gastronomy, which was pretty as close to exactly what I wanted to be doing with my life as existed, anywhere in the world. So I kind of got into my head all right, I've got to collaborate with these people. So I sort of, talked my way in to work there at the Nordic Food Lab for a summer. I took 3 months off in the summertime from my regular graduate school work, and just completely fell in love with it. Immediately just kind of getting swept up into the kind of exploration and question asking, people asking questions that like I'd never considered, like if we're trying to like be sustainable and eat insects for protein, like, well, what could make an insect delicious? And they were applying fermentation to all kinds of ingredients I'd never seen before. So kind of right away, we figured out that the type of exploration that they were doing and the kind of knowledge I had about how flavor worked, how food chemistry worked, was extremely compatible. So I kind of reluctantly went back to grad school, snuck over another couple times, and then eventually when I graduated with my PhD, they hired me to come on full time. So that was in 2014, and the first project I worked on was designing and building the original fermentation lab at Noma.
Interesting. And I hear now Noma's mindset is really heavily based on fermentation and what it can do for a whole food in general, right? So I can tell. But it was an interesting time, right? Because everybody's talking about different area, molecular gastronomy that started to transition into more natural approach. And then how can we make the most of natural bounty Nordic nature provides, which is like insects or any natural items which people would never have thought of eating. So,
right. Well, and so they decided to do that because so Noma is a short for Nordisk Mel, which means Nordic food in Danish. And so the idea was to cook only with ingredients from Scandinavia, which it turns out is incredibly limiting. Lemons and limes and olive oil are right out the window right away, and in the middle of winter, you get like maybe a beet and a potato, and that's just about it. So if you're one hears a lot about creative limitations being a driver of creativity. I think that was very much true at Noma, where if you're going to limit yourself to a geographic area that doesn't provide the kind of stuff that you're trained to cook with in culinary school, you kind of have to like reinvent where you find flavors. So kind of turning the job of a cook on its head from finding the right ingredients that you know about and cooking them in familiar recipes. They really had to start thinking about what flavors are we looking for, and where can we find them? And so that led to foraging different wild plants, eating insects, and a lot of the work in fermentation was driven by that, because when you ferment food, you are like sort of physically increasing its flavor, which I think was a very exciting thing for chefs to get into.
Right. So it's interesting that Noma is a great restaurant, but it's far beyond. It's inspired so many other chefs. Like, for example, koji became kind of more general term, which can people vaguely understand. It's the magic mode to be able to make everything fermented and delicious. But I think the force behind it was Rene Redzepi of Noma, and of course, you helped him to pursue that fermentation path, right? So I think it's what you've done at Noma sounds like really influential, not to just one restaurant, but to the whole world of culinary discovery. So, so what is your responsibility at Noma right now?
So yeah, so when I started at Noma full time about 10 years ago and stayed for I think 2.5 years. I was living in Denmark. Then my boyfriend was still living in New York, and I was about to turn 30, and I was kind of ready to like have maybe a more adult life. So I moved back to the States and started writing my book, and worked at MIT for a while, and started working on Good Eats with Alton Brown. So I've been doing that for quite some time, and then a little over a year and 2 years ago, maybe, the Noma as it exists now is, was never designed to like exist in a static way forever. And I think there's a lot of thinking going on about how a place like Noma can be a force in the world beyond just, feeding 50 people a night. So they actually invited me back to help them with that. And right now my responsibilities are, I'm basically a senior advisor to the fermentation lab. So we have 3 really great chefs at the fermentation lab at Noma. And I work with them both to, solve technical problems as they come up, but also to brainstorm new ideas and find sort of, scientific papers that have like one really cool finding or a piece of data that was not applied to cuisine, but that we can figure out a way to use creatively. So it's a lot of both problem solving and finding new things, which is a space that I really love to work in.
Right. Interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I just got a chance to speak to some people from Noma recently, and it's just a concept, right? Like you said, it's not a restaurant. It's just an organic concept. It's completely always evolving, and you don't know what's going to come out. And I saw some products that Noma developed under the name of Nova Projects, and it's really inspiring. So, yeah, it's exciting that you keep working on what they do. So what have you learned from your job at Noma and also, Alton Brown and everything you've done so far?
Well, it's funny because I remember even early on in my time there, someone was asking me like, oh, did you like learn a lot? I'm like, yeah, I learned so much here. They're like, what, about cooking? I'm like, sure, yeah, about cooking, but also about like how to ask questions and what questions to ask and like what type of knowledge and information is valuable to seek out and kind of incorporate into your mindset. I mean, in academia, you're so encouraged just sort of by how the career works to silo yourself and like really focus and drill down onto like one topic and one subject area. But of course with food, there's dozens of subject areas that have really fascinating things to say about it. I was a chemist. There's stuff in engineering, in microbiology, in botany, even outside the strict sciences like anthropology and history and ethnobotany have just really amazing things that if you don't know to look, you'll never kind of enrich your knowledge about food that way. So yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was really like widening my net of what was interesting to look at and what was worth pursuing. I think was really dramatically opened up by my time working at Noma.
Right. I think what you're saying has to be always everybody's head, right? Because we eat every day and we are made with what we eat, and it's a history and a background. Understanding those, we are more responsible in eating and really get more nourished more efficiently, effectively by understanding the whole background and what's good for you and why we're eating this. So yeah, that's amazing. I think it sounds like you created a new category of job.
I do feel sometimes like I'm making it up as I go along. So that's a nicer way of saying it, what you said.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so we'll take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll dive into Arielle's new book, Flavorama, and how to apply science easily to your dishes at home. So please stay with us.
Today's program is brought to you by Korin, a supplier of Japanese chef knives and restaurant supplies. Korin is proud of their Japanese culture and traditions, but they want you to know that their products are not just for Japanese restaurants. Their knives and tableware bring out the best qualities of food from every culture and fit into every restaurant, from French to Pan-Asian to American, and that is why they are located in New York City, where people from every country in the world come to eat. Korin's Tribeca showroom is home to the most extensive collection of Japanese chef knives in the world, including Japan. Stop by to view their exquisitely designed tableware and the rarest natural sharpening stones. They have a whole range of knife services, from repair and rust removal to reshaping and realigning. Korin is dedicated to this ideal, bringing the highest quality Japanese design to your table so you can experience the unparalleled quality of Japanese craftsmanship in your home or restaurant. For more information, visit korin.com.
Welcome back. You're listening to Japan Eats, HRN, Heritage Radio Network. I'm your host, Akiko Kotayama, and my guest today is Dr. Arielle Johnson. Arielle is a flavor scientist who advises some of the top chefs' restaurant bars in the world. Okay, so let's talk about your new exciting book, Flavorama, A Guide to Unlocking the Art and Science of Flavor, which came out in March 2024. So what is the theme of the book, Flavorama?
It's basically taking everything I've learned being a scientist who studies flavor, and then everything I've learned being, in and around restaurants, applying that creatively, and really trying to condense it down to teach cooks, not just professional cooks, but home cooks, cooks everywhere, kind of the essential parts of the science of flavor, and then suggestions for how to use it to cook more interesting food.
Right. We're going to dig into the details, but my impression of the book, it's science, but you throw in some technical terms. If I wanted to dig into, I can look up the term, but the balance between technicality and approachable style is so perfect that I kept reading without reading science book. It's just a fun reading.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah. So, all right. So your book is based on the 5 laws of flavor. So what are the 5 laws?
Yeah, so I guess I'll preface this by saying, these are not really found in any, textbooks anywhere. When I sat down to try to plan out, how do you introduce people to this, huge topic of the science of flavor, because it hadn't really, there wasn't any really systematic writing about it that was available to the public. So you're taking a huge subject area and have to try to make it make sense to people. I love metaphors and I love patterns, but the 5 laws of flavor basically encompass things that are always true about flavor, and then that can be applied in lots and lots and lots of different ways. So flavor is molecules, flavor is taste and smell, flavor follows predictable patterns, flavor can be concentrated, extracted, and infused, and flavor can be created and transformed.
Right. So why do we need to understand the 5 laws of flavor?
Well, I mean, basically anything you do in the kitchen is a version of one of those things. I really think of that as sort of the establishing the boundaries for what world that we're working in. But with the first few, I think people don't even necessarily have an idea that they are, experiencing anything related to chemistry when they're experiencing flavor. But all flavor does come from molecules. Flavor is taste and smells, and those are what we call our chemical senses. So our sense of taste, our sense of smell, both have, receptors, sensors that respond to molecules from our environment. So we are, establishing that we are in the realm of physical matter, things that we can study using chemistry. And I know a lot of people had a very bad time learning chemistry in school, which is a real shame. But I think the really exciting takeaway about that, that maybe people can learn to love chemistry again, is that with sort of a chemist's eye towards things, you can basically look at a molecule and predict how it's going to behave, and any molecule, like a molecule of sugar, for example, is always going to behave like every other identical molecule of sugar, wherever you find it, in the universe throughout history. So that's actually pretty powerful because random stuff doesn't really happen. Of course, the sort of interactions and stuff can get quite complicated, but I think in terms of real applications of something like that, there's this, you often get taught in culinary school that if you're seasoning a sauce or a dish with lemon juice, you should add it right at the end of cooking, because if you, cook the lemon juice, then you'll kind of dampen the sourness and make it not as fresh tasting. And, a lemon is not just a lemon, but it is, a fruit full of sour tasting acids and sweet tasting sugars, and, very importantly, very lemony smelling smell molecules. So while you are cooking lemon juice, if you add it early on in cooking, you're not actually changing the acids at all. So in terms of straight acidity, you're not actually changing the sourness of the lemon. But what you are doing is heating up smell molecules, which, we can smell because they float through the air, and essentially like boiling them off. You're evaporating them away. So after you do that, you have all the acids that you started with, but you've lost most of the lemon aroma. And it turns out that lemon minus lemon aroma tastes like very, very flat. So, and that's something that you like really wouldn't be able to like understand or arrive at unless you had a sense that like, okay, I'm cooking, so things are happening to molecules, and also there's taste components as well as smell components to this stuff.
Right. So this the second law of flavor is taste and smell. I really it was amusing to read about this because it's kind of mixed up smell and taste, right? And it clearly distinguished scientifically, and also you broke down 5-ish tastes, and also the smell. Also, you broke down some smell, like 6 components, which that was really refreshing. So maybe you can just briefly tell our listeners who haven't read the book how taste and smell interact.
So, yeah, I think it's pretty obvious to most people that taste is a big part of flavor. I mean, at least when we're speaking in English, we use the words more or less interchangeably. With smell, when most people think of smell, they think of like sniffing something. But it turns out there's actually 2 different senses of smell. Sniffing something that's in front of you, that's called orthonasal olfaction. You're essentially sucking smell molecules with your breath into your nose and then into your nasal cavity, where they bind with smell receptors at this sort of like sticky patch at the roof of that area in your nose. And then as you breathe, the air goes into your lungs. But, since that's basically a tube, the air can go in through your nostrils, but it can also come in the back way. So that's something called retronasal olfaction. And while you are eating food, chewing it, swallowing it, it is giving off all kinds of smell molecules while it's in your mouth. And those smell molecules will basically float their way up the back of your throat and through the back door of your nasal cavity, and then, find your olfactory epithelium, the area where the receptors are. And so essentially, you can smell things that are in front of your face, but also go sort of backwards and smell things as you're eating them. And so retronasal olfaction, orthonasal olfaction, 2 different senses of smell. But it's actually like a very famous phenomenon in psychology that when we are experiencing retronasal olfaction, so smell while we're eating, you don't actually perceive it as happening in your nose. Your brain kind of reroutes some of the signals, and it feels like it's happening inside your mouth. It's essentially like an illusion. It feels very much like taste. So for most people, they interpret it as taste, and I suppose you have to do a lot of like kind of weird psychological experiments to figure out that it's not taste. It is actually smell. It just feels like taste. So. If you're just thinking about taste, that's sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. And so like almost any other flavor that you can think of, herbal or appley or vegetal or earthy or toasted, those all come from smell. So in terms of like numbers of sensations, smell is actually a much like larger part of flavor than taste is.
Right. It's very interesting, right? We don't really become not aware, even not just smell or taste, to distinguish 2 sensations, but also retronasal and also nasal. Like once I started to be aware of those things, then I can taste more, smell more, enjoy more of food and drink. So yeah, that's a very awesome breakdown of what your everyday real experience. One of those things, the 5-ish tastes that you described. And umami is one of the tastes which makes flavors along with smell. So on this show, we often talk about umami, but the concept of umami may not be widely understood. So what is umami and how does it affect your entire experience of eating food?
So umami is sometimes called the fifth taste, mostly because sweet, sour, salty, and bitter were all pretty well established for quite a long time as being tastes, whereas umami was not identified as a sensation for the first time until the very early 20th century by Professor Kikune Ikeda in Tokyo. And, after he did all of his research, finding that there was this other flavor besides these four, and he called it umami. It took about, I want to say, like 80 or 90 years for biologists to find the taste receptor for umami. So it was really in a lot of limbo in the 20th century because it's very obviously a sensation, but since scientists are kind of skeptical of new things without proof, I think it took finding the taste receptor for umami and identifying it for a lot of people to come around to the idea that it was its own taste. So I like to describe umami as the taste of savoriness. It's really a kind of rich and meaty and mouth-filling flavor. If you eat Japanese cuisine, you're probably already familiar with it. It's the dashi, the basic fundamental cooking stock in Japanese cuisine is basically completely 100% umami, from kombu and from katsuobushi. It was actually discovered in the first place because Professor Ikeda was working with kombu, with seaweed stalks, and sort of boiling them down and figuring out what molecules are in there. But besides that, it is the kind of rich flavor of really complex tomatoes, of dried mushrooms, of aged cheeses, of things like Iberico ham or prosciutto. So it's this kind of really lovely blanket of savoriness as a taste.
Right. In your book, you have a beautiful list of Japanese or non-Japanese food items that contains a lot of umami. So it is funny. And if I'm not wrong, I think the Professor Ikeda, who found the taste umami, it's found was named as an official name. Mm-hmm. He was drinking miso soup one morning, and it's tastier than usual. And he asked his wife, "What was the difference?" And I added kombu. That was how I heard it. The discovery started.
That's great.
Yeah. So, well, that means that if you add umami, kombu to your soup, that can be something new, like elevated experience.
Well, and it really goes to show you that kind of science knowledge just doesn't just flow outward from the lab into the kitchen. If you're paying attention in the kitchen, you can come across fascinating ideas that you'd never think of exploring if you were only reading other people's science papers. So I love that example.
Right. Okay. So, and I heard umami can enhance other tastes. Is that true?
Yeah, umami and salt are really supportive of each other. We sometimes call it synergistic in sensory science. Basically, you can take a salty food and take out some of the salt and add glutamate, which is the molecule responsible for umami taste. And with a lot less salt, but also glutamate, it can taste as salty as the original. So it's actually I think quite a few people are looking at it as a reducing sodium in diets by increasing umami is going to be interesting.
And more satisfying that you don't overeat. It's not like empty calories, like potato chips or something chemically made.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because once you start like at the very, let's say you're sitting down to eat a food that is very umami. Once you start tasting umami, it like builds up your appetite, so you actually become like more hungry, more excited about eating. But after a certain point, after you've had a decent amount of umami, it actually turns your appetite down and increases satiety. So it both encourages you to eat, but discourages you from eating too much.
Right, with satisfaction. That's right. So, and also, in addition to the 5 tastes of sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and umami, there's a 6th taste called kokumi. I don't think many people know about that, and it's not in your book, but I read a great article about it that you wrote on Noma Project's website.
Yes.
So, what is kokumi, and how can you use kokumi for better taste experience?
So kokumi is a flavor that's sort of like umami. I think we're at a point now where we don't necessarily know if it is its own taste. I believe we think that it's an enhancer of umami and some other flavors, as opposed to something that we have like a distinct biological circuit for. But where umami comes from one amino acid called glutamate, that's an amino acid is the building blocks of proteins. Kokumi comes from slightly larger molecules, 3 different amino acids joined up into what we might call a tripeptide. But glutathione is the most famous kokumi flavor, and that's found in, it's especially rich in things like garlic and yeast and things like that. So kokumi enhances kind of the not just the umami, but the sort of like richness and mouthfullingness and roundness of other flavors.
Interesting. So, like umami, when we Japanese people taste something delicious, we say umai and adjective. And when we taste something with kokumi, we say kokugaru. So, even like little child can use that term, not understanding clearly, like you just explained. So, yeah, kokumi is. I don't think many people know about this term yet, but I think it's going to be very important. Sensation you can detect. Once you're aware of it, you would look for it. And you kind of like longer lingering deliciousness. And it's very precious.
It is really, really delicious. And, I think often when we think about richness in food, we assume that you mean like fatty food, which of course does taste rich, but I think there's so many more dimensions of richness, including umami and kokumi that, really make food lovely and kind of, light and enjoyable and not too heavy to eat. And I think, the more people discover these things, the more they can kind of, finesse their cooking to, find richness without just using, the same 1 or 2 techniques that maybe they had been using before.
Right. And you said that garlic is one place to find kokumi, but is there any other place to find kokumi?
Yeah. I believe other alliums have quite a bit. There's a lot in cheeses. Fermented foods produce both a lot of umami and tend to make kokumi, because they can both be made by breaking down proteins. So if you take a fresh piece of meat, it has lots of glutamate in it, but most of the glutamate is bound up in proteins. So if you then salt it and age it for a long time, you give those proteins a chance to break down, and you get free glutamate, but also often kokumi. I believe kokumi will often form when you simmer foods for a long time. So if foods have various ingredients, have various like amino acids in them, and if you make a lot of different types of stew with vegetables, with meats, and gently cook it, for 3 hours or so, then those things can come together and form kokumi.
Right, like beef bones or pork bones, like something. Right.
Exactly. Onions are a really good source of it too.
Okay, so kokumi listeners, it's K-O-K-U-M-I. It's going to be the word of the year next year, maybe. We'll see. So we used to think that great food could be made only by experienced cooks, But the idea of food science giving whoever wants to make good, delicious food, including myself, it's very helpful to understand food science. So how can we use your book to become a good cook?
Well, it's funny because even when I talk to chef friends of mine, they'll often say like, well, I'm not a very scientific cook, but, and then I'll, we taste a lot of different things, or we, think about flavors and then try to go find ingredients that have them. And, as we talk through it, I'm like, well, so by, identifying a flavor and then going looking for it and tasting lots of ingredients and seeing if you find it, that's essentially what we do in sensory science. So, I think the kind of vibe or the feeling of what scientific cooking must be like often seems a lot more technical than I think it actually is. I think lots of chefs use a lot of different types of science in ways that don't appear, like wearing a lab coat and working with test tubes. So, but yeah, I think the idea of learning science to cook does make people think about that it's just the realm of professionals and specialists. But a lot of it is just when it comes to the science of flavor, just about taking some time to like pay a little bit more attention to flavor. Slow down while you're cooking, while you're eating. Maybe try out your ingredients before you cook them. See how their flavor changes, and then looking for patterns. So if you want to do something elaborate with that, like develop new fermentations or make a lot of very special and specific infused and extracted oils, like you can definitely do that. But flavor chemistry is happening every single time you cook, even if you're just sautéing onions and then adding them to stew. So I feel like if you have even if you're just a casual cook, if you have like a little bit of an idea of what is actually happening when you're doing ordinary cooking, then it becomes much easier to make food taste the way that you want and enjoy it more.
Right. The flow of your book, my impression was that you really showcase the components and you tell us, the readers, how you can play with them, like layering or just by understanding each component, first of all, and rather than just try an error, which usually in my case error, to mix and create a dish. So yeah, so maybe you can give us some examples of the recipes, you plenty of in your book. So
yeah, well, so I think it depends on like the type of cook you are and what type of stuff you're looking to do. So if you are an experimenter, a tinkerer, then some of the fermentation recipes will probably be a lot of fun for you. I have a recipe for pumpkin seed miso, so it's essentially thank you. A miso is typically made with rice turned into koji, and then with soybeans. And in pumpkin seed miso, instead of soybeans, you use raw pepitas, pumpkin seeds, which actually are like quite high in protein. So you get a very different flavor from miso, but a similar umami richness. There's also a few vinegar recipes. If you, sometimes I say the term leftover wine, like, oh, if you have any leftover wine, and people laugh because like, who has leftover wine? But if you do, wine, basically any wine is incredibly simple to make into vinegar. In fact, most wine, if you like leave it alone with a little bit of, contact with the air, eventually it will turn into vinegar on its own. But starting a sort of like wine vinegar pot or barrel, they make small barrels in your house if you want to experiment. That's a great way to do it. If that sounds like less fun, I like problem solving, and a problem that I've always had is that I have lived in cities for almost all of my life, in apartments for all of my adult life, but with very little outdoor space. So I love smoky flavors, but it's been impossible to do any smoking in my apartments because you set off the fire alarm in about 2 seconds. So I was thinking about ways to incorporate more smoky flavors into food. And there's things like liquid smoke, which is basically distilled smoke, which does add a lot of smokiness, but I find can be kind of harsh. Smoked paprika is delicious, but it does have quite a heavy paprika, earthy flavor to it. So as I was sort of pondering this, I had this memory of being a child and smelling my father's tea. He liked to drink lapsang souchong tea, which is a black tea from China that is smoked over pine branches. So it's a tea that is like intensely smoky. If you like mezcal or smoky scotches from Isla whiskey, you'll probably enjoy it, lapsang souchong. So as I was kind of remembering that and thinking about different cooking techniques, I was thinking like, well, I've made a lot of flavored oils before. It's like really easy to put ingredients in oil like fresh herbs, and oil is essentially a sponge for smells. It is very, very good at pulling flavor molecules, but especially smell molecules out of ingredients. So I was thinking like, well, if liquid smoke is too harsh, what if we added lapsang souchong tea to oil, and what would happen with that? And it makes a really like beautiful smoky oil, which is not an ingredient I'd ever really worked with before. But I started using it for poaching fish, sometimes dressing vegetables, and it's this like really lovely light perfumed smoky flavor that I can add to things now, even if I can't fire up a smoker in my apartment.
Right. So I'm curious, what kind of base oil do you use for adding the tea?
I usually use like a grapeseed oil. Any fairly refined but neutral, nice smelling oil will work. I definitely recommend sniffing any bottle of oil before you use it, giving it like a little nose check, since refined oils can oxidize very, very easily, and then you get this kind of unpleasant like paint cardboard smell. It could definitely also work with a like a nut oil or a fruit oil like avocado or olive oil or hazelnut oil. You'd just be getting kind of some of those flavor notes in with the smoke.
Right, I definitely want to try that. Okay, so some of our listeners may be interested in food science, and you created a new genre of job according to what have you done. An amazing job. So any advice for them on how to get into the field?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of food science programs. In the U.S., I think pretty much every state has one. Most public land grant institutions have an agriculture or like a school of agricultural and environmental sciences, and there's often a food science department there. I didn't really figure that out until I was getting my going into grad school and getting my PhD, but it's definitely possible to start earlier than that. You can go into a food science program. Within that, there's like different subject areas that you can specialize in. Wine is a big one. I actually learned most of what I know about, flavor chemistry from wine scientists. I was working in the Department of Viticulture and Enology at Davis. But, you can also go into like microbiology or food safety, product development. But, if you have other interests, you don't necessarily have to just look at food science, because there's so many fields that have interesting things to say about food, because food is such a huge and varied topic. Plant science is something that I did not get into as much as I think I would have liked while I was in grad school, but understanding how plants make flavors, trying to get them to make more flavors, either by changing how you grow them or breeding the plants. There's a lot of really fascinating stuff happening in that field as well. So if you're looking for formal education, that's a great way to do it. I think, fortunately now, even more than, 20 years ago when I was getting started, there are a lot of like really good books available to the public about the topic of, sort of the bigger topic of science and food, but especially about things like flavor and cooking. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it, and I think that it's the kind of topic that we need a lot of perspectives and voices in to make sure that we're doing it right. So I'm really excited that people from kind of different walks of life, different backgrounds, are getting more interested in pursuing it.
Right. I think you proposed a model for professional chefs to work with scientists because you did at Noma. It's really a good example. So maybe on top of that, you have to hang out with the chefs you want to work with. Probably that's like
I mean, like I think sometimes people want to, like, well, how did you like convince them to let you work at a restaurant? Like I kind of just asked. And it depends on the person, what response you're going to get. But I think if you're interested in a topic and have some knowledge and want to do the work, I think people are excited to collaborate.
Right, and it's win-win, right? The chefs learn more and make better food, and the consumers enjoy eating them, and more science developed. So yeah, it's a really great way for all of us to enjoy eating itself in a healthy way. So what are your plans and dreams?
Well, right now, it took me about 5 years to write the book, which is kind of a long time. And so, since it came out about 2 months ago, I've really had a fun time going around promoting it, essentially. Meeting new people, doing events where people come and ask questions, going on radio shows like yours, and I think people are really, really excited and hungry for more knowledge about food and about what they're eating and about how their experiences work. So if there's a dream of mine, or if there was a dream of mine, of kind of giving everyone the background knowledge so that we could talk about this, I think it's starting to happen. Beyond that, I'm really interested in like different ways of sharing this information. I don't know if that would be maybe like a podcast or something more like interactive and visual, like TV. I've done a couple videos with Bon Appetit before that were a lot of fun. I'm just really fascinated by all the different opportunities that we can find for sharing this information and helping teach people. So I'm really excited to go into that further.
I really hope you're going to utilize any kind of medium you can use to spread the word of what you are talking about in your book, Flavorama, A Guide to Unlocking the Art and Science of Flavor. I'm going to keep reading this. I just go back as a reference book too. So really thank you so much for writing this amazing book. So by the way, you have Retro Nasal Industries, your organization. What is this? It sounds curious.
So besides books and fine dining, the science of flavor, it turns out, is like quite useful to like a lot of different industries. A while back, I started getting more requests to sort of collaborate and consult on projects, and eventually there were enough that it made sense to incorporate that into a real thing instead of just kind of randomly doing stuff. So at Retronasal Industries, so retronasal because retronasal olfaction, we use different approaches to flavor, whether it's kind of the more chemical side or hospitality or the culinary side, to help people solve problems and make new things. So we've worked with a few startups on some of their products, both understanding how to experiment like a chef, kind of unlock more creativity. Also how to understand the kind of nuts and bolts of flavor perception. And we've also worked on some more consumer products as well. I know that's vague. Some of them are still under NDA, but yeah, no, I mean just like sharing the knowledge through different media. There's lots of different projects and collaborations that it turns out knowing something about flavor is very, very useful for.
Right. I think we are all curious about getting to know more about, because it's everything in a daily life, right? Every second you're smelling, you're tasting something. So yeah, and keep me posted. And so where can we find your updates online and on social media?
So yes, I have a website, ariellejohnson.com. I put some things up there. You can read some of my older pieces too, as well, and find links to some events and also how to buy the book if you don't want to buy from Amazon. There's some local bookstores linked there. Most of my updates otherwise are on Instagram. My account's Arielle_Johnson. And I really like that medium for sort of quickly connecting with a lot of people over ideas. So I post stuff there, and I love to hear feedback about it.
Great. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Arielle, and hopefully you come back and talk about your new projects.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So listeners, if you have any questions or comments about the show or suggestions for show topics or guests, please contact us at japaneats@heritageradionetwork.org or kikotema.com. Japaneats is a weekly program. It's always available at heritageradionetwork.org as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify as a podcast. Engineer is Sam Girardi, and thanks for listening. I will see you next week. Japan Eats is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick Latham.
And I'm Leah Bottima.
And we're the hosts of Were You Raised by Wolves?
Each week we try to make the world a kinder, nicer place.
Well, that's the idea, at least.
I mean, we try.
Have you ever wondered what to do if you're ghosted?
Or what to do when a friend asks you to borrow money?
Or the proper way to eat Cheetos?
You know, the big questions.
So please find Were You Raised by Wolves wherever you listen.